Writer, director Tyler Bournes brings us Desert Shadows. And this one stars Mitch Pileggi from the X-Files fame. And this tells a story of a guy who is attacked by something in a kind of tunnel in the desert. And it's some type of creature. And he only has a kind of a vague memory about what's kind of happened. But at the same time, his brother has gone missing also that he was with the desert. And cut to a few years later, and he's kind of searching around for clues about what happened to his brother. And he teams up with a kind of university student played by Emily Sweet, who's wearing an awful wig, it has to be said. And they go and try and investigate under the kind of the tutelage of the university professor played by Mitch Pileggi. And they discover the kind of a deepening hole of conspiracy, if you like, in regards to the circumstances of this creature and what's involved behind it. What will happen? You will have to watch the movie and find out. So let us discuss Desert Shadows and what works in this movie. So this obviously, I mentioned, stars Mitch Pileggi, who of course is known for the X-Files, and this movie feels like it is inspired by the X-Files, probably why they cast Pileggi in the first place, I would imagine. Because it's very much more about an investigation into the lore and the circumstances of the creature, rather than a kind of creature attacking people, more overtly, so to speak. So it's much more of a kind of a mystery more than a kind of a monster movie, if that kind of makes sense. Now, the advantage of that, of course, is that this is quite a winding plot with various layers that kind of get peeled back as we kind of go through the movie. Who's involved? What's actually happened? What are the circumstances? Where's the missing brother? All of these things. So the plot itself is a little more kind of winding, a little more complex than your typical kind of monster or creature on a muck kind of style film, which makes it somewhat of an intriguing through line, an intriguing narrative that keeps you engaged, because obviously you have to kind of pay a bit more attention to it rather than just kind of watching a creature wreck stuff up. So that was kind of quite good. And I have to say there is some interesting kind of mythology behind this and what's actually involved. It's far more than it's just kind of like a monster and an alien that's kind of crash landed. It's a little bit, there's more to it, which makes it, more meat on the bone story-wise, which, again, I can appreciate. I thought the acting was fairly solid, actually. Again, it's more dialogue and character-based, which generally calls for a better quality of kind of performance from our actors that sell these roles, which are meant to be a little bit more intense and a little bit more kind of believable than, let's say, typical teenagers running away from some type of beast. And they do a good job, and I kind of quite like them. As I said, they're hammered a little bit by what's probably some budget restraints, I would suggest. But the acting, I think, is solid. The creature design is a CGI creature for our moment, but we do see some more practical effects on kind of like younger creatures, so we speak. And the design, certainly, of our CGI main creature is an interesting kind of design. It's similar to other creatures I have seen in other kind of B movies, but nonetheless, it's an interesting kind of crab-like kind of monster that looks pretty terrifying. And of course, we have some variety and some fairly kind of gross out practical effects, with some other things that will kind of pop up here and there in the movie as well. I've got to say, even though this isn't more an overt kind of creature feature, so to speak, it's still relatively fast paced, with kind of a lot of kind of discoveries and things happening and kind of like twists through the movie. So I was actually quite engaged in regards to the kind of the movie's pacing, even though it's less of an action film. And obviously it does feel a little bit like the X-Files. So if you're a fan of that kind of property, I would probably suggest maybe checking this movie out. Let's talk about what doesn't work, and let's talk about the kind of the look of the movie. Now, this is a 2022 film, but I have to say it feels like it's a movie from like 2003, around that kind of time. In a number of ways. For like the CGI, for example, we've mentioned the main creature is CGI, And I have to be honest with you, it looks like CGI from that period. The CGI is not brilliant. It kind of looks like, you know, cheaper Sci-Fi Channel kind of style CGI, somewhat kind of cartoonish, that sort of thing. So the CGI isn't all that. And then the other thing is as well, it's just the kind of like, for example, the cell phones that people are using, like flip phones, or kind of like the old Nokia style phones. They're not using like modern smartphones. So I'm assuming this either takes place in like the early 2000s, or everyone's just poor. Anyway, so it's kind of like, it looks like it's made then, is the point I'm kind of getting across, even though it is actually made, you know, relatively in the short past, 2022. Now, those of you who are expecting more of a overt monster film may be disappointed, because we don't really see much of our kind of main creature at all. And we get a kind of a sequence at the beginning, and the poster art looks all like it's going to be a heavy monster film, but it's not. This is not what you will get with this film. I'm assuming that budgetary restraints prevented this thing from being on screen a lot, and therefore it's used sparingly. And I do mean sparingly. The actual main creature probably has less than 2 minutes of screen time in the entire movie. But what we do get instead is some practical VFX humans with makeup on. And they are of varying effects. Let me just say, they're okay. I mean, again, I'm somewhat forgiving of a low budget creature feature and indie movie like this. But yeah, I mean, it feels like a cheap out, if we're being completely honest with you. There's a couple of good kill scenes in it, but again, they're kind of CGI enhanced and things like that. As I've mentioned, I think just as some of the cheapness kind of creeps in. Emily Sweet's character, she's typically kind of like a bleach blonde, but she's wearing this like goth kind of like black wig. Why not just have her as a blonde? It looks terrible. It just looks terrible. I thought, you know, why is she, you know, was she meant to be like a cancer survivor or something? It's just like, no, it's just like a terrible aesthetic choice. You know, it looks like really cheap. And there's just some other kind of like cheaper things here. The story itself, I think, for the most part, is quite intriguing, but it does kind of just get a little bit kind of confused in part. I would say in the first half of the movie, it gets a little bit kind of like confounded in its own mythology, I guess you would say. So, you know, and again, it's a mystery film more than a kind of actually an attacking film, if that makes sense, a creature feature. And the end, I don't know if it's completely satisfying. So, overall, it's a kind of okay science fiction horror movie. It feels like it's a little bit kind of incomplete in a way. It feels like it needed to have the creatures and the VFX needed to have a little bit more rendering. A little bit more budget kind of spent on kind of just the production value of it. Maybe just a kind of like another kind of like rewrite, just kind of like, you know, tighten up some of the kind of the elements here that I feel were just a little bit kind of janky in regards to sort of the some kind of plot points along the way. But it's not a bad movie. It's kind of a reasonable kind of X-Files kind of approximation. I'll give it a 5 out of 10. Have you seen Desert Shadows? Please do let me know what your thoughts are on it, and I shall look forward to you next time. Bye for now.